So the question here is, can teachers actually make learning easier for students? And the premise I'm really coming at is are there things in terms of routines and habits that we can instill within the classroom? And in doing so, students pick up these habits and eventually learning becomes easier. And we all know that our students come with many different gifts and talents. I've been an educator for 35 years. I'm recently retired, and it has always been a passion of mine to figure out how can we support students in terms of their learning. I've had many conversations over the years with many different educators, and they'll say, students don't know how to learn or they don't know how to study anymore. And it seems to be something that we've moved away from because we've focused so intently on curriculum, especially at the senior high level in terms of trying to get through all of the curriculum that needs to be taught and overlook the routines and habits that need to be established and put in place so students can be successful. Now, in the first session, we talked about focus mode and diffuse modes and learning the Pomodoro technique. And the focus mode is anytime you're trying to learn something new, you've got to sit and you have to focus without distraction. The Pomodoro technique is a 25-minute exercise in terms of sitting and focusing, and you set a timer. And then when the timer goes off, you go into diffuse mode. And in a junior high classroom, which is usually around 40 minutes long, that actually works out beautifully. You focus for 25 minutes, and then you change routines, and you have the students do something else, get up, move around, etc., etc., etc. And we instill that habit and that practice right within the classroom. We also talked a little bit about short-term, long-term memory. We're going to talk more about the brain side of things. So again, this is a review of Learning How to Learn by Barbara Oakley, PhD. And she was a unique student. Through high school, she failed all of her math and all of her science classes, and yet managed as an adult to go on and become a professor of engineering. Clearly found a way to overcome the deficiencies and the things that she thought she was not good at, but actually is very good at. So let's continue here with part 2, and we're going to start with just a brief conversation around reading power and boosting your reading power. She talks about doing a picture walk. So whenever you're introducing a new chapter to students, whether it be social studies or chemistry or whatever, have them walk through the book or that chapter and look at the pictures, look at the highlights, look at the headings, look at the chapter summary questions, etc., etc., and then have a conversation with the class as a whole to see what they can actually remember and recall. And this is a great practice and a great habit to instill in students, and starts to engage them in terms of their mind. They know where the content's going. They haven't mastered anything yet, but at least they know what's coming at them. So Oakley likes to talk about these space aliens, and she draws out some figures, which I'm going to do for you here in a little bit, but she likes to use metaphors to help students sort of connect one thing to another thing. And that's what happens with learning, especially when we're trying to go from short-term memory and move things into long-term memory. So understanding the basic elements, your brain has billions of neurons. We know that. They are very small. 10 might be the width of a hair. The nucleus is considered the eye. They have an arm called an axon and 3 or more legs called dendrites. And we're going to draw this out in a second. And the dendrites have many legs attached to them. And these are called dendrite spines or dendritic spines. Important note, neurons will talk to other neurons. They'll make connections. And that's the part we're talking about when we're moving from short-term memory into long-term memory. This communication can go on, and these are examples of your thoughts that are taking place, those conversations that you have in your head. The stronger the link, I should say, not the shorter the link. And we know that with repetition, like playing sports, playing basketball and shooting and practice to get those hoops in, or playing a musical instrument, etc., instills the learning and embeds the learning. Neurons in your brain can change and grow, and this is called neuroplasticity. And we all know about neuroplasticity. We used to think that the brain never changed and it sort of deteriorated from the time that you're born, but neuroplasticity plays a role all the way through your life, even in your senior years. So let's take a look here in terms of what she's talking about with these space aliens. I'm going to try to draw this out for you. I'm not an artist, but let's take a look at it. So we're going to begin here with the nucleus. And she draws it kind of like with a little eyeball in here, etc., etc. And then there's this arm that comes off one part of it, and this is called the axon. So we've got the nucleus, and then we've got these little legs that come off here, and these are called your dendrites. And if we stop and we think in terms of short-term memory, these dendrites might be an example of short-term memory. And we know that if we don't find a way to embed our learning, it's going to disappear on us very, very quickly. So these dendrites, I drew 3 of them, but there are some people that have very extensive short-term memories, and they might have even more of these legs. Well, okay, that's our focus mode. We're learning something new, and then we want to find ways to actually embed it. And then these little things kind of grow off of these dendrites, and these are called dendritic spines or dendrite spines. And it's their job to reach out and make connections. So I'm going to slide this up here a little bit, and let's take another look here. And maybe it's learning how to play the guitar, and you've just learned your first chord, which is probably going to be a D, and the second chord you learn is probably going to be an A, and you're going to practice that. And these axons are going to reach out to these dendritic spines, and then you get this synapses. And then it goes so on and so on and so on. And all of this is called a neuron. So that's the basic premise. She calls them space aliens because they got all these legs and all these little extensions and everything that takes place. She believes in talking about metaphors, in other words, of using something that you're familiar with and connecting it in another way with something that maybe is not so familiar. When you think of a metaphor, then a trail is created in your brain and activated. And one of the memory tricks in terms of, let's say, I'm trying to remember here what it's called. A memory palace, as you move through your house and you connect things to various things in your house, and the more ridiculous and the more insane that you can make the pictures and the images, the better your ability to actually recall. Metaphors help you get it or recall it more fast or faster. This is known as a neural reuse theory. With a solid understanding of how we learn, we can think ourselves smarter. So I think all of us realize that we have different gifts, things that come really quite easy to us, and we become quite passionate about it, and then we stumble on those things that don't come easily. And I think really the point that's trying to be made here is that we can succeed in all of these different areas. Common excuses to learning. You've heard them as teachers and as support staff. I don't have time. I have a job. I work on the weekends, etc., etc., etc. And again, instilling that habit so that 25 minutes, focus time, moving on to do something else is something that they can carry on when they get home. I don't have a good imagination. Creating metaphors, quirky pictures will come with practice. What I'm learning is useless. All learning is useful is the premise that she makes. New learning serves as a resource to help transfer ideas into our life. New learning will make connections to all those other things that we do in this world. My teachers are really boring. We've heard that, and I've heard that as a principal. You're the one that must come up with what has meaning for you. If teachers did this, what would you do, is one of her comments. But I still think as educators, we need to teach the skills of learning, memory, and recall. She talks a lot about sleep, and sleep being one of the examples of diffuse mode, where your brain works out a lot of the things that are going on. The power of sleep, neurons change when we learn something new and then go to sleep. While sleeping, dendrite spines get longer and can create more links utilizing synapses. And as a educator yourself, as a principal, many times I'd be stuck in a problem with scheduling, etc. I couldn't figure it out. I will always set it aside, and then in the morning or in the shower, whatever the case might be, boom, the answer comes to me. I'm sure most people have been perplexed by a problem and then wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning, and there is the answer. And that's diffuse mode. Now, there's a real battle going on with teenagers and sleep. Many of them are sleeping with their phones. They've got them in their hand. They have them under their pillow. The phone vibrates in the middle of the night. They wake up and they attend to their phone, and they're not getting adequate sleep. And that's something, again, that we need to have a conversation about. I've had it with many, many, many students in my office and say, hey, well, let's talk about your phone. I said, do you sleep with your phone? Yeah, and we go through the routine. So we try to instill and we try to educate them in terms of new learning about how to personally manage themselves. Space retrieval practice. This is another aspect in terms of these dendritic spines and these axons reaching out and synapses firing. This is called spaced repetition. And the more you learn and practice and sleep, the more you grow. More dendrite spines and synaptic links, stronger links, plus new links. Wow, what a powerful learning structure. But that concept of repetition, and again, that's an activity that can be done in the classroom in terms of repeat, day after day after day. Now you can see why procrastination and cramming for students does not work. They could spend all night they could spend all night studying and come in and fail the test, and they've tried hard, but they didn't take advantage of the best tool that they could have, is to space out those study periods into shorter periods of time and repeat. Brief practice sessions over a number of days will allow you to store information for recall, and this is called spaced repetition. So another metaphor that she will do is she'll talk about short-term memory. A student backpack as if it's a metaphor for short-term memory. We know that backpacks hold a lot of things, but they don't hold everything. And she compares that to a locker, which is much larger and holds many more things. School bags are like working memory. Small, can't hold much, but really handy as it holds whatever you are working on. Lockers are like long-term memory. It's in the background, down the hallway. It can hold way more, but often it has so much stuff it's hard to find. And that's where we pack the locker full and we can't make the connections to find the information that we are actually looking for. So, conversation around working memory. That's that short focus mode. Working memory is towards the front of your brain. It's above your eyes and is known as the prefrontal cortex. Your working memory can be slippery. You're introduced to a bunch of people, maybe it's 3 people, and by the time you get to the third person, you can't remember the name of the first person unless you've actually been focusing well. This is why remembering lists of things can be so challenging. If you're not focusing, you can drop the information, the shopping list, things I have to do today, etc. Also, that's why learning something can be so challenging. So you look at subjects in senior high like physics and chemistry or another language. Some brains can hold more in working memory than others, and we talked about that. There are some that are gifted. They can have long lists of working memory. Whenever we have a student tested by a psychologist, they check their short-term memory and they do tests for their long-term memory. If you want to remember something for a long time, it needs to go into long-term memory. Okay, here's long-term memory. Let's talk about the locker. You can store way more information in your locker. Long-term memory, it can never be filled. So you've got lots of capacity. Long-term memory is not centrally located like the prefrontal cortex in terms of your short-term memory. It's way more spaced out and is connected by brain links. Remember those neurons, axons, dendrites, and dendritic spines, synapses, those are those brain links. Simple information can create small brain links. More complicated information is made up of longer, more complex sets of brain links. So here's an activity that could actually be done in terms of a chemistry or a physics class or even a mathematics class. So you finish the first unit, you have your final exam that comes along, then you move into the second unit. Well, you get to the final exam for the second unit, oftentimes much of what you taught in the first unit is not remembered. So therefore, you could actually make part of your second unit exam cover some of the information and the vital information from the first unit exam, and so on and so on. It's like a cumulative final exam when you get to the end of the course. And that's all we got for you today on this one. We're going to do a part 3 and give you a little bit more information. So we're kind of digging into a whole host of books in terms of memory and learning, and through going through this whole process, the goal and the plan is to hone in on best practices for teenagers, for memory and learning, and things that teachers can do to enhance that within the classroom. It's Curtis talking to you today. Thank you for your time.